I grew up in a part of Kentucky that I don't think really exists anymore. Not in the same way it did back then. People always imagine the countryside as wide open fields and horses grazing by white fences, but where I lived, it was more like dense trees pressing against the sides of narrow gravel roads, houses tucked away like secrets. It was quiet, yeah, but not in the peaceful way people think. More in the way that you could walk outside at night and hear nothing but cicadas and your own breath, and it would almost make you dizzy. My family lived in a farmhouse. We weren't rich. I had a younger brother named Eli, 2 years younger than me, and we shared a room upstairs. I think I was 12 when this all happened. Our neighbors, the Haskins family, lived 2 houses down the road, which in country terms meant about a quarter-mile away. The dad, Henry, worked as a mechanic in town, and the mom, Joanne, stayed home most of the time. They had 2 kids, the daughter, Marcy, who was maybe 14, and a little boy named Alan, who was around 7. I didn't know them super well. We'd wave when passing by, and sometimes I'd ride my bike with Alan, but that was about it. The first time I knew something was wrong was in the middle of June. Our windows didn't have air conditioning, just box fans propped into them, and you could hear everything outside if you kept them open. Eli and I were lying awake, whispering about some video game he wanted for his birthday, and this sound cut through the air. High, sharp, like something was being torn apart. It was a girl screaming, like when you jump out at someone. It was long, ragged, and it didn't sound like it belonged to someone our age. It was deeper in parts, shriller in others, like there were 2 voices trying to come out at once. Mom came upstairs not long after, her face pale, telling us to stay in bed. She left again, and we heard her and Dad talking in low voices downstairs, the kind of voices parents use when they don't want their kids to know what's going on. That night ended with my parents heading down the road to the Haskins place. I remember standing at my bedroom window, watching their flashlights bob along the gravel. The next morning they wouldn't say much. Dad just said something about Marcy having a spell and told us not to gossip if people at church asked about it, which was funny because gossiping was basically the church's main sport. But the screaming didn't stop. It happened maybe 3 or 4 nights a week, always around the same time, after midnight. Sometimes it was short bursts, other times it went on for what felt like forever. One time I woke up to it and looked at the alarm clock, 1:47 a.m. The numbers burned in my eyes. When the screaming finally stopped and I dared check again, it was 3:12, almost an hour and a half of it. The worst part was when the voice would change. It stopped sounding like Marcy altogether. Sometimes it was deep like a man's voice, but warped like it was underwater. Sometimes it was fast, words spilling out so quickly I couldn't understand any of them, just syllables and gasping breaths. My brother covered his head with his pillow every time, but I just lay frozen. One night in particular, I crept downstairs and found my mom sitting at the kitchen table, smoking one of the cigarettes she usually hid from us. She didn't notice me right away. Her face was pale and sweaty, and she was staring at nothing. I asked if she was okay, and she jumped. All she said was, "Go back to bed, honey." During the day, things looked normal. You'd see Joanne hanging laundry on the line, or Henry tinkering with his truck. But if you looked at their faces, really looked, you could see how tired they were. Their eyes were sunken, skin pale. The whole house seemed heavy somehow, like the air around it didn't move right. One Saturday afternoon, I went over there with my mom, who was bringing a casserole. Small town rule. If someone's going through something, you bring food. The house was a mess. Dishes piled up, clothes everywhere. Alan sat in front of the TV, but he wasn't watching it, just staring, like his brain had gone somewhere else. I caught a glimpse of Marcy through a crack in her bedroom door. She was sitting on the floor with her knees pulled up, her hair hanging in front of her face. I only saw her for a second before Joanne rushed over and shut the door, but I swear she was muttering something in a voice that wasn't her own. A few days later, another scream jolted us awake. Only this time, my dad actually left the house in his truck. He came back after sunrise, looking like he'd aged 10 years in one night. He didn't go to work that day. I overheard him on the phone, telling someone that it wasn't right, it wasn't her voice. Things built up over the next couple of weeks. More neighbors got involved. Mr. Keaton from across the road, the elderly lady down near the old church. They'd all gathered at the Haskins' place a couple of times. My parents went too, leaving Eli and me home with vague instructions like, "Don't answer the door." Then came the night the church got involved. A man I'd never seen before showed up. He wasn't our regular pastor, but he wore a dark suit despite the heat and carried a small worn-out Bible. His hair was slicked back, and he looked tired but stern, like he'd already seen too much in his life. I heard later he was some kind of traveling minister who specialized in situations like this. That night, we weren't allowed to go with my parents. They left us with Mrs. Keaton, who smelled like mothballs and made us sit through Wheel of Fortune reruns while my stomach churned with nerves. When Mom and Dad came back, they didn't tell us much, but I knew something had happened. Their clothes smelled like smoke, and Mom's hands shook as she poured herself a glass of water. It was 2 nights later that everything came to a head. The screaming started again. It was louder, more violent, carrying across the trees like a siren. Dad grabbed his boots, and Mom followed him out, and I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped out after them, staying far enough back so they wouldn't notice. The Haskins' yard was lit up by car headlights, neighbors' trucks parked at odd angles. A small crowd had gathered. Some people prayed quietly, others just stood pale-faced, clutching their arms like they were cold. Inside, the living room was chaos. I peered through the front window, crouched low. Marcy was on the floor, thrashing, her hands bound with some kind of cloth. Her voice came in bursts, guttural one second, shrill the next, sometimes sounding like 2 people speaking over each other. The minister stood at her feet, reading from his Bible, his voice steady despite the racket. At one point, Marcy stopped moving, her eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. Then she let out this laugh, high-pitched, mocking, nothing like a 14-year-old girl. It cut straight through me, and I clapped my hand over my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound. The whole house shook with noise, slamming doors, rattling windows, though nobody touched them. I saw one of the kitchen chairs skid across the floor by itself. Then suddenly, Marcy went still. Dead still. Her chest wasn't even moving. People screamed, and Joanne tried to run to her, but Henry held her back. Before anyone could react further, Marcy's body jerked upright, and she bolted out the front door. She ran barefoot across the gravel, into the yard, and collapsed hard onto the ground. Everyone rushed outside, surrounding her. I stayed hidden in the shadows, heart hammering. She lay there, not moving. Then she gasped and sat up. Her face was calm. Her voice was soft when she asked where she was. The adults cried, hugged each other, thanked God. My parents walked home with tired relief in their eyes. For a while, things seemed normal again. No more screams at night, no more weird voices. Marcy even went back to school, though she was quieter than before. But something in her was different. She grew up, moved away for a while, even got married in her 20s. But the marriage fell apart within a year. People whispered about her being unstable, about strange things she'd say in the middle of conversations, words that didn't sound like her own. I saw her once at the grocery store when I was older. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me, even though we'd grown up practically next to each other. Her eyes had that same glazed look I'd seen the day I peeked through her bedroom door all those years ago. It's been almost 20 years since that summer, and I still don't know what really happened in that house. My parents never gave me a straight answer, and most of the neighbors who were there that night have passed away or moved. This was in 2009, I think. I was 21 or 22. I'd just moved out of my parents' place a few years earlier and was still figuring my life out. At that point, I was working at a local store on and off, trying to save enough money to go back to school. My old man had left me this house after my grandma passed away, but it sat empty for years because I couldn't afford to fix it up. It was on this old county road just outside of town. The woods creep right up to the shoulder. I used to go back out there sometimes to check on the place, mostly just to make sure the roof hadn't caved in or some raccoons hadn't moved in. One weekend, I brought my buddy Jack with me. He'd been one of my best friends since middle school, the kind of guy who was always pushing me to do stuff I wouldn't normally do. He had this way of making dumb ideas sound like the greatest adventure in the world. We took my Ford, loaded a few boxes of tools, some old paint cans, and a cooler of drinks in the back before heading out of town. It was a warm, late spring afternoon. Now the road out to my old house wound past a patch of woods we used to cut through as kids. About 5 miles in, if you looked hard enough between the pines and oaks, you could see the top of an old steeple poking through. That was the church. I'd always known it was there, but never once had the urge to go near it. My parents used to tell me it had been abandoned since the 70s, maybe longer. Some sort of fire had damaged part of the building, and the congregation just left it to rot. We were driving along when Jack spotted it and leaned forward in his seat, pointing. "Hey, is that a church back there? Looks like a damn haunted movie set." I laughed it off and told him what I knew, but of course he got that spark in his eye. "Dude, we should go check it out after we hit your place. Seriously, how many times are we going to be out this way? It'll be fun." I said maybe, knowing he wouldn't drop it. When we got to my grandma's old house, the place was exactly as depressing as I remembered. The siding was peeling, there were vines climbing up one corner, and the porch sagged just enough to make you feel like you were about to fall through. We spent a couple hours there patching a few holes in the wall, carrying out boxes of junk that had been sitting in the closets for decades, and checking that the plumbing hadn't completely rusted out. I found an old box of baseball cards I'd forgotten about, which Jack immediately started flipping through like they were worth thousands. We ended up on the back porch after, drinking beer out of the cooler while the sun dipped behind the trees. That's when Jack leaned back in his chair, grinning. "So, church time," I groaned, but I already knew the answer. "For real?" "Hell yeah, come on, what else we got to do? Sit here and swat mosquitoes?" So we loaded back into the truck and followed the narrow gravel road that branched off behind the woods. It looked more like a deer path than something meant for vehicles. The trees pressed in on both sides, branches scraping the sides of the Ranger. At one point I swear we ran over a log, and Jack cheered like we were off-roading. Finally, the woods opened up into a small clearing. The church sat there like something out of a forgotten photograph. The white paint had peeled almost completely off, leaving the wood underneath exposed and gray. The steeple leaned just slightly to the left, and a rusted bell hung crooked inside it. Windows were broken, the stained glass cracked into sharp little triangles. The front doors, heavy and wooden, were shut, but sagging off their hinges. Inside, our footsteps echoed across the warped floorboards. Pews were overturned, hymnals scattered across the ground with their pages curling from moisture. The pulpit still stood at the front, though it leaned like it might collapse at any moment. It was creepy, sure, but also kind of fascinating, like stepping into a place where time had just stopped. We wandered around for a while, Jack snapping pictures on his flip phone and making jokes about ghosts. Toward the back, half hidden behind a fallen beam, we found a narrow staircase leading down. The door was already off its hinges, leaning against the wall like it had been ripped free years ago. "Basement," Jack whispered like he was narrating a horror movie. "We gotta check it out." The air was cooler down there. The floor was dirt, uneven and soft in places, and the single light bulb overhead had long since died. We used the flashlights on our phones, the weak little beams barely cutting through the dark. It looked like a pile of garbage, but it became clear it wasn't just trash. There were dozens, no, maybe hundreds of women's things scattered across the ground. Hair ties of every color, stretched out and grimy. High heels, some in pairs, some not, the leather scuffed and straps broken. A couple of purses, too, emptied out with their contents spilled across the dirt. Lipstick tubes, broken compacts, even what looked like receipts or ticket stubs, yellowed with age. The sight of it stopped us cold. Jack crouched down and picked up a heel, turning it over in his hand. This is messed up. I didn't even want to touch anything. The whole pile gave me this crawling feeling in my stomach, like we were looking at something we shouldn't be. It didn't feel like the kind of thing left behind by accident. It looked deliberate, like someone had been collecting them. I told Jack we should go. We made our way back upstairs, stepping carefully across the weak boards. The sun was starting to dip lower now, turning the light outside a reddish gold. We were just about to step out the front doors when Jack suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. "Don't turn around," he said under his breath. His voice was tight, not like his usual joking self. Of course I turned my head. Coming down the trail toward the church was a man. Short, stocky, like average height, but built wide. He wore a dark something despite the warmth and had something slung over his shoulder I couldn't quite make out. The moment his eyes caught ours, he froze. Then, quick as anything, he darted off the trail and ducked behind a cluster of trees. Jack grabbed my arm. "Let's go. Don't run, just walk." So we walked. Calm on the outside, but every muscle in my body felt tight, like I was seconds away from sprinting. As we moved toward the truck, I caught glimpses of him again. He was still there, shadowing us through the trees, close enough to see. Every time we looked his way, he'd shift behind a trunk or crouch low, trying not to be seen. Back at the house, we sat on the porch again, drinking in silence, both of us pretending it hadn't rattled us as much as it did. When it came time to head home, I locked the door tight and told myself I wasn't coming back out there for a long while. And I didn't. Years passed. I moved into an apartment closer to town, started dating someone, got a steady job. Life moved on, though every now and then I'd think about that church and feel a little shiver run down my spine. It wasn't until like 4 or 5 years later that I heard the rumors. I was at a cookout with some old neighbors, people who still lived closer to that part of the county. We were sitting around with paper plates on our laps, kids running through the yard, when someone mentioned break-ins that had been happening back then. Apparently there'd been this guy going around in those years, sneaking into houses when women were home alone. Sometimes he'd just watch them from a corner until they noticed him. Sometimes he'd take things, small things, personal items, hair ties, shoes, clothes. In a few cases, it had gotten violent. No one had ever been caught. I asked when this had all gone down, what years exactly. The answer lined up almost perfectly with that day Jack and I went exploring. I knew in my gut it had to be the same man. It's been about 4 years, and I'd rather just forget the whole thing. But sometimes it comes back up when somebody randomly asks me if I've ever dated anyone crazy. I'm not talking about the fun kind of crazy, like quirky or unpredictable in a cute way. I mean the scary kind. The kind where you realize you never really knew who that person was at all. I was 22. I was working at a small grocery store, stocking shelves, and sometimes bagging if we were short-staffed. I'd dropped out of community college after my second semester, and I didn't really have a plan. My parents didn't say much about it, but I could tell they were disappointed. My dad was one of those work hard, keep your head down, and provide types, and my mom just wanted me to be happy, but also wanted me to figure my life out. That was around the time I met Kendra. She wasn't from my town originally. She had transferred in during senior year of high school, though I didn't meet her until years later. My friend Lucas introduced us at a house party. He'd known her through his cousin. I remember she was sitting on the back porch, chain-smoking cigarettes even though everyone else had moved inside because it was cold. She had this smile, half-smirk look about her, like she was always in on some private joke. We started talking that night, mostly about music. I was into bands like Modest Mouse and older Arctic Monkeys stuff, and she rattled off this mix of underground punk bands and weird experimental groups I'd never heard of. She had this way of talking where she didn't really care if you kept up with her or not. She just kept moving. I thought it was kind of cool. Different. A couple weeks later, we were dating. She was odd. That's the best word I can think of. Not just in personality, but in the little things. Like she had this habit of drawing on her arms with pen, full-on scribbles that looked almost violent, like she was trying to scrub something out of her skin. She also had this way of zoning out in the middle of conversations, staring past me with her jaw tight, and then when she snapped out of it, she'd laugh like nothing happened. None of that bothered me at first. I think when you're young and kind of lost yourself, you mistake odd for interesting. We dated for about 6 months. There were good times too. Driving around late at night, blasting music with the windows down, eating gas station food at 2 a.m., hanging out at my parents' place, watching whatever crappy Netflix horror movie was trending. She got along okay with my friends, though Lucas told me more than once he thought she was off. Anyway, one night, Kendra showed up at my house. I had just finished a shift at the grocery store, and I was sitting in the living room in sweatpants, eating leftover Chinese takeout, watching some YouTube video. My parents were out of town that week visiting my aunt in Florida, so I had the house to myself. The doorbell rang around 11 p.m. I thought it was Lucas, because sometimes he'd drop by unannounced with a six-pack, but when I opened the door, it was Kendra. Her hair was messy, like she'd been running her hands through it a lot, and her hoodie sleeves were pushed up past her elbows. That's when I noticed the stains. Dark red blotches all over her forearms. They weren't fresh enough to still be dripping, but they were unmistakable. Blood. I just stood there. Kendra, what the hell? She gave me this look like I'd just asked her the dumbest question in the world. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and then she said, very softly, "Come with me." That was it. No explanation, no hi or anything. Just that. My throat went dry. What's on your arms? She glanced down quickly, like she'd forgotten the stains were even there, then pulled her sleeves down. It's nothing. Just come with me. Nothing? That's blood, Kendra. What the hell happened? She didn't answer. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, rocking slightly, her eyes locked on mine. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on, I said. I tried to keep my voice normal, but I could hear it cracking. Her expression changed, quick and sharp. Anger flickered across her face, twisting that smirk into something darker. You don't trust me? This isn't about trust, I said, backing up a little. You show up covered in blood and tell me to follow you in the middle of the night. What do you expect me to do? Come inside, we can watch a movie or something. Just calm down. And she snapped. Her hand darted into the pocket of her hoodie and came out gripping a kitchen knife. I don't know where she even got it. It wasn't one of ours. The blade caught the porch light, flashing silver. My heart slammed into my throat. I shoved the door shut as hard as I could, the edge of it knocking against her arm. She shouted, not words, just this raw sound, and the knife scraped against the wood before the door clicked shut. I twisted the lock so fast my hands slipped on the knob. On the other side, she banged against the door once, twice, enough that the frame rattled. "Let me in," she screamed. "No." My voice cracked. "Go home, Kendra. If you don't leave, I'm calling the cops." Silence followed. My whole body was shaking. I stood there, pressed against the door, listening. After like a full minute, I heard footsteps on the porch, then the creak of the stairs. A car door slammed somewhere down the street. Then nothing. Around 3 in the morning, red and blue lights flashed through the windows. I opened the door before they could even knock. 2 cops stood there, both looking serious. One of them asked if I knew a girl named Kendra L. My mouth went dry. "Yeah, she was here a couple hours ago. Why?" They exchanged a glance, then asked if they could come inside. Apparently, earlier that night, Kendra had broken into another girl's house across town. Some girl she vaguely knew from high school, I think. For reasons no one could figure out, she attacked her, stabbed her in the arm and shoulder before the girl managed to lock herself in a bathroom and call 911. That's where the blood came from. The cops told me Kendra had left the scene before they arrived, but they were looking for her. They asked if I knew where she might go, who she might be with. I just shook my head over and over, my hands sweating so much I kept wiping them on my sweatpants. Kendra was arrested a few hours later. The girl she attacked survived, thankfully. She was hospitalized for a while, but she made it. As for Kendra, I never saw her again. I don't know if she's in prison now or in some kind of psychiatric facility or what. Nobody really talks about her anymore. How close it came. If I'd stepped outside with her that night or hesitated when she pulled that knife, maybe I wouldn't be here telling this story. I still have the scar on my front door from where the blade scraped against it. My parents painted over it, but if you look close enough, you can still see the faint groove in the wood.